Hello, I'm Dapper Dan Gvozden, and I own every issue of Amazing Spider-Man, including the annuals, which definitely count.
And I'm Mischievous Mark Giannacchio, and I own every issue of Amazing Spider-Man, including the annuals, which don't count. Dan, I might challenge your initial statement, but I'm going to wait until the Slack segment before we get into that, okay? I'm just want to bait our listeners now.
I am dreading this segment more than I ever have. I almost want to cancel this podcast right now because I have a suspicion of what's coming. So,
all right.
Anyway, everybody, welcome to the Amazing Spider Talk, the show where two fans and collectors uncover the strange, fun, and fascinating history of the Spider-Man comic universe. Thanks for joining us for this review episode of the Amazing Spider Talk.
If you want to swing along with us on our journey through Spidey's past, present, and future, subscribe to Amazing Spider Talk on your favorite podcast app.
Yeah, and this podcast exists because of the support of our Patreon members. If you want to receive early episodes, exclusive artwork, and keep this podcast going, go to AmazingSpiderTalk.com. There's a big old button there that says Patreon on it, and you can click on it and consider joining our Patreon, where I will say, like Mark, Season 6 of the show has already started on the Patreon. Heck, we've even got an interview with Ron Friends and Tom DeFalco up there that you can listen to early. So if you're desperate for Mark and I's much delayed Season 6, it's already happening on the Patreon.
Yeah, but we could refer to it as the baby season, right? I mean,
there you go. The delayed baby season. All right. Well, today on the show, Mark and I are going to be discussing Amazing Spider-Man Volume 6, number 21. This issue is written by Zeb Wells. The interior and cover pencils are by John Romita Jr., inks by Scott Hanna, colors by Marcio Menyz, and of course, letters by VC's Joe Caramagna. This issue was first released on March 8th, 2023. Mark, this is the issue that says on the cover that has been much anticipated, and I think fairly accurately. So we've been waiting to find out what happened in this. So why don't you tell us a little bit about Amazing Spider-Man Volume 6, number 21.
Sure thing, Dan. I just hope my recap is as anticipated as this issue is. We start on what I have to imagine is the typical morning in the life of Peter Parker. The sun is shining, birds are chirping, he's relaxing in bed until he realizes it's a work day and he needs to haul his rear to his good buddy Norman Osborn's. Totally typical, totally cool. Speaking of typical, we switch to Mary Jane getting her two children, Owen and Stephanie, ready for a day at the park. Cool. We got Owen's name, but I thought that the girl was Romy? Maybe Romita is her middle name? Who knows? Anyway, Owen decided he no longer likes the park, while Stephanie, Romy, other child, questions multiple times if clowns have ears. All the clowns have ears down here, Stephanie. Paul arrives at the scene to do pretty much nothing, typical dad, and MJ bemoans the fact that they are never leaving this house. Peter is walking to work and enjoying the sunshine, but cut away to Mary Jane and family, and it's starting to snow. What? Snow? This time of year? In this economy?
Only if it's LA, Mark, where we got snow a couple weeks ago. So, it sometimes snows in April, and it sometimes snows in Los Angeles.
That's pretty crazy, but maybe not as crazy as what's about to come next in this issue, because something doesn't seem right. And right on cue, there's a twister and a shadow within that twister, leading Paul to identify the shadow as him. The Scribble Man is back. Paul and MJ apparently have a drill for just this situation, and Paul takes the kids and MJ stares, jaw open. She then calls Peter, and indeed, quote-unquote, he came back. Which brings us to 1 year earlier. Even though the recap page said a year and a half ago. Never mind, Mark. Just move on. Okay. Oh, so let's put our headsets on here, Dan. Remember a year ago, random groceries at the stores were either in short supply or cost 12 times as much as they usually do, and the bulk of Americans were ignoring the fact that we were in the midst of a raging pandemic. So much has changed in a year, Dan, and I imagine so much has changed in this year, right? Anyway.
Don't I know it, yes.
We flash to a jail cell to a character named Rabin. Rabin. Where have I heard that name before? I bet Dan knew exactly who Rabin was before a Marvel editorial told us, and he's going to have the full Dan-splain breakdown after the synopsis to prove it to me. Well, since I'm a little slower to tie those loose ends together from stories that are 15 years old, I'll just say Rabin seems like a pretty bad dude, having killed a bunch of people in his jail cell. He's also talking about someone called Kuhal Ajar, pronunciation not verified. And oh man, this sounds like some Secret Scrolls stuff, Dan. Rabin sacrifices someone else, and then we cut back to the very ending of Amazing Spider-Man number 884, when a mysterious figure shrouded in light appears in front of Peter and MJ, prompting Nick Lowe to ask us if we remember that happening. Well, now that you mention it for the first time in 35 issues, I sure do remember now. So yes, this man was Rabin, and he came looking to kill Peter so he could conduct more of his bloody math. I gotta admit, I'm still not connecting the dots here, but I just have to imagine Dan sitting at home reading this and just exploding from excitement over the deep cut pull going on here. Right, Dan?
Absolutely. Couldn't wait.
Okay. Just bursting with anticipation. Spidey and Rabin fight some more until he kicks him out of the building onto the street below, where he lands in an explosion of light. Spidey lays the smackdown some more until Rabin reveals himself. A double-page spread with some flashback images shows us this is the guy Spidey and Wolverine fought during the Brand New Day era when there was a blizzard in New York City. Thanks, look back low. So it seems that Rabin is a little aggravated by the fact that the last time he appeared in a comic, Spider-Man cost him the opportunity to connect with his deity and become an emissary, and really, who can blame him? So Spidey has been marked for vengeance, and just to add another layer to the drama, we find out that another, aka Mary Jane Watson, no longer Parker, has been marked for a sacrifice. MJ, after a brief costume change in the midst of a life-threatening battle, notices the marking on her wrist, and by touching it, it transports her and Peter somewhere. And that's where we end this issue of Amazing Spider-Man.
Woof, Mark! What a long recap there, but a lot was packed into this issue, which to me says a lot of what I want to say about this issue, which is I think they're kind of cooking with fire here, or cooking with gas. Is that the saying?
I mean, they're cooking with something. Yeah. I mean, it's igniting something.
Yeah. Well, we're getting right into it, and I thought this was a really exciting issue of Amazing Spider-Man. Now, I'm not going to go all laying out the red string and taping stuff up on the walls, but, I do think it is notable that this issue really pulls so heavily from really old, 15 years old issues of Amazing Spider-Man for such a major event. I mean, for those who don't know, Zeb Wells was part of the Brand New Day Spider-Man team, and his first, issues on the book were Amazing Spider-Man's numbers 555 and 557 all the way back in 2008. And that was the story that introduced a majority of the characters that we see in this issue, and I expect that we're going to see over the next, 5 more issues of this story. And, that's 400 issues ago. I know that, that sounds maybe perhaps more exaggerated than 15 years ago, but either way, that's a long way to go for, people who haven't read that story or who did and forgot it. Just like Spider-Man did in this very issue, where he doesn't recognize Rabin or Rabin. So, Mark, what was your kind of initial reaction when you picked up this book and discovered that? I mean, I had seen in the solicits that this was coming, so I, was excited about it, being a fan of that old series or story, and went back and reread those. But I know that you don't look at the solicitations. So what was it like reading an issue like this for the first time?
Yeah, I mean, as we discovered during the available Alan and mischievous Mark period, I do not read solicits. I mean, no one who's normal reads solicits, but you read solicits, Dan, and I love you for it. So, I mean, I'm glad that you can bring the fire and thunder to these conversations because you actually did your homework. I mean, as in my case, I had to go back and reread those issues following reading this issue of Amazing Spider-Man because I was like, I do not remember this story for the life of me. I even went back to. I do remember recapping it on Chasing Amazing back when I ran that site because I was doing a read through of Brand New Day at the time. And, you know, my as I read that recap, I was like, okay, I remember some of this, but like the nitty gritty of the details were totally lost on me. So I you know, like, hey, it all counts, you know. We're not talking about like what issues count per se, but like this is all story. It's all mythology that we can pull from, and you know, it makes sense that Zeb Wells, you know, in this major arc that he's been, you know, basically unfurling over the last year and change in Amazing Spider-Man, it makes sense that he would go back to his first story from Amazing Spider-Man to start connecting some dots, but you know, whereas I do want to say, and you know, I'm not about to give it a grade right now, but I enjoyed reading this issue tremendously, but like all the details from this storyline did not click with me until I went back and reread it. So it's a bold choice to do for a story of this nature so many years later, but you know, like, let's see where it goes, right? I mean, like, I don't want to cast judgment on whether or not they should be pulling from something like this until I see how it all unfurls.
Yeah, and I want to talk a little bit about what happens in Amazing Spider-Man 555 and 557 for those who haven't read that story or those who need that recap. But I will, like, you know, in terms of judging this issue on its own, I don't think a lot of those details are really necessary to fully understand. Like, you know, there is a lot of magical mumbo jumbo, but I think like the basic elements of it are clear. Like whatever it is, this guy wants to become a god. He needs X, Y, and Z. Like, you know, the details of it, I don't think are super necessary to just jump on board and appreciate the story on its own. That might not be the case as it goes forward. And Mark, you and I can make fun of it for being obsessed with secret scrolls. But I don't think that this is quite Spider-Verse level of, you know, creating all these different MacGuffins that we're asked to care about that we don't really care about.
Right.
This is a life or death battle, and to me, that's the stakes, rather than like who's got what marking on their head and so on and so forth. That being said, yeah, go ahead.
No, I would say I agree with that, and yeah, like you don't need to know these comics like gospel in order to enjoy this comic. It's just, you know, I will say in going back and rereading post this issue, you know, new issue of Amazing Spider-Man, you know, and I was even, you know, texting you before the show, like, you know, certain panels and stuff, and I'm like, now I can kind of, having read it, or reread it, I can kind of see where this might be going, and so it's useful from that standpoint. But hey, like, if you don't need to read it, and I'm gonna assume going forward you're not going to need to read it, but like it might give you a little bit clue about the machinations of how what's about to happen is happening. So anyway, why don't you give your recap of it, Dan?
Yeah, sure. So in this story, a blizzard takes over Manhattan, and Spidey and Wolverine save a man named Rabin, or Rabin, however pronouncing it, who is attacked by a group of Mayan warriors. And you know, Spider-Man and Wolverine intervene thinking that these Mayan warriors are the bad guys. And the police arrive and take the Mayans and Rabin into prison. But, you know, in a pretty well-constructed twist, I think, it turns out that Rabin is actually the bad guy and is trying to assume the powers of a Mayan god named Wayep, who is the god of death, and to become something called Kuhul a jaw. Again, pronunciation aside, which is basically this god's emissary on Earth. And Rabin, as he does in this issue, is using what he calls like math or advanced calculus and symbology to determine like that he needs to sacrifice a woman so that he can bond with Wyatt. And in that comic, it's Carly Cooper because she's in the police station that he's currently being held at. And he also like identifies Peter as something called the sun-blooded clown priest. We don't get a lot of information about what that is. Like maybe it's related to the radioactivity in his body, the sun-bloodied thing. Who knows? And that he needs to act quickly during something called the Uayep cycle, which actually is, I looked up, is like apparently a real thing where in Maya culture, where they believe the dimensional barriers between Earth and this place called Xibalba, which is basically the realm of the dead in Mayan culture, which also gets name-checked in this most recent story. And so Wyatt, like this, who is a demon god from Xibalba, again, also part of Maya tradition. I did a lot of Googling. He shows up, and Spidey and a group of homeless war veterans attack Wyatt to kind of stave him off from Carly Cooper and from Rabin. And they stall just long enough for the sun to come up and the ritual to be canceled. And then Spidey beats the hell out of Rabin, who then declares that he will be back in the future when the stars align to start the ritual again, which I imagine is what we're seeing happen in present day Spider-Man comics.
Well, a year ago present day.
Yeah. And forget about the whole like sliding timeline thing. It's been 15 years in our world. Who knows how long it's been in Spidey's world. So that's kind of the gist of it. And, I outline all this because, one, I think this is actually a really fun story. And I know your Chasing Amazing post about it was kind of like mixed on it. But I got to admit, for me, this was the story where, like, I think I fully bought into Brand New Day as a concept. For all the positive things we say about it now, at the time, I was pretty furious about One More Day. And, I think we can look back on that first Dan Slott arc as being pretty solid. But it definitely was kind of like sticking it in our faces, like with the Peter kissing another woman. Like it was a lot to take, in the wake of One More Day. If you were, someone that, as much as we like to beat up on people who are obsessed about the marriage, like it was a big, change. Yeah. So, I think it took a while, and there were some rocky stories at the beginning there with like Jackpot and Freak, and to me, this was like the first like truly like artful story that I got caught up in the world of, and that might be just like Chris Bacalo's art, which is, I think, at his peak Spider-Man art in this 3-issue run. And I kind of just was like, these are good Spider-Man comics. And, that might have been the start of my journey of realizing like, I care more about good Spider-Man comics than I do about any particular status quo for the character. So I'm curious your impression back in the day, and having reread it this week, what'd you think about this story?
Yeah, I mean, like, that's the thing. I mean, like it's different strokes for different folks, I guess. I mean, I do like this story in a vacuum, but like I think overall, like I read this, and my big takeaways was I mean, at the time I remember being impressed with Wells as a writer, because I think, prior to that, I kind of knew Wells as like, there was that issue of like Peter Parker Spider-Man. It was like Beach Blanket Bingo or something like that. And I was like, this book is kind of trashy. And I was like, oh wait, no, he can like write a serious Spider-Man story that's both full of humor, but also like the right kind of humor. I mean, we talked about that in our last episode with Joe Kelly in terms of what is the kind of humor that really clicks here. And I feel like from a humor standpoint, this clicks. Like this kind of, I read this story and kind of felt it was some of like the extension of mysticism that JMS had introduced, but like I still found like with the Moreland and Ezekiel and even the other stuff when JMS did it, it was rooted in more humanity and at least with Peter and his reaction to it. And because this was less about Peter and more just about this other guy, Rabin, and his machinations and rituals and whatnot, I was just kind of like, all right. I mean, like, admittedly, like, I'm not a huge fan of like mystical stories within the Marvel universe. I do like things that are a little more grounded, or if they're not grounded, I like things that are a little more cosmic in terms of like space stuff. But I felt this was a good version of a kind of story I don't typically like, if that makes sense.
Fair enough.
That's why it's mixed. It's like this was well done, but like it's still not like if I went back and thought of like my favorite Brand New Day era stories, I would not pull this one first. But I do agree
is that still consistent today?
Yeah, I would agree with that. I mean, like, I agree with you that this kind of after, not a rocky start to Brand New Day, but like you said, like, there was those first few issues where they were clearly trying to both establish what the new status quo was and yes, rub our face in it a little bit. I felt this was the first story where it was just like, nope, we're just telling stories again, man. I mean, kind of like what we got with Zeb Wells here. I mean, like, when this whole run started, I mean, we had this like shock of what did Peter do? And, the cover with MJ and Peter on the outs and, like it enraged people and got people upset. But the fact of the matter was when he just started telling the Tombstone story, it was great. So like, I appreciated that this was the first arc where we're just telling stories here, man. We're not worried about, Jackpot or Freak or worried, who, all the relationship dynamics. I mean, we get like Harry in here for a little bit, but like even that, it's not like, I don't think it's weirdly in our face like that Harry is back, but I don't know. It's just, it was good in that regard. But it's still not my favorite of the run. I mean, I think of things like the and I can't remember the villain's name, but like the paparazzi villain. Is it Paparazzi? Was that her name? I'm trying to remember. It's a Dan Slott story.
Well, I thought maybe at first you were talking about Paper Doll.
Paper Doll. Yes. There's that one. And anyway, point being, good, not great story for me, but that's because of my own personal taste in terms of the kind of story it was. So
sure, and I really like it. I mean, there's definitely things I would ding it for, but like it's got a great like New York sensibility to it. It's the kind of snow story that actually really leans into that environment for Spider-Man. But that all being said, I think it's like if you haven't read it and you're enjoying what's going on in the Wells run, I do think it would add a lot to this current story. But I also want to say how much I appreciate the news story for, I mean, in some regards, like I think I could ding the news story for being very repetitive of this, but I also think it provides a really like solid grounding if you haven't read this to getting into the Rabin, Wyep, Maya, mythology, which also exists in other Marvel comics. Wyep apparently had made appearances elsewhere, which I didn't know about, post this story in Amazing Spider-Man. But I just would recommend people go check it out if they're enjoying this or they want to learn more. But I also want to commend this new issue for not relying like entirely on you having a thorough knowledge. Like me repeating all that stuff is to say, like, even reading that original story, a lot of the mysticism stuff, I don't think it's meant to make a lot of sense. Right. It's, again, just like this issue. It's a life and death stakes, and so long as you get the basic gist of it, it's grounded in, like, Spider-Man being a person a normal person being like, this is all mumbo jumbo, and like I can only get so involved in it. I'm just here to save Carly Cooper, and I think the same is true in this story, and that's what I think makes this story like really strong as a first issue of a new arc. Let's move on to the actual content of Amazing Spider-Man number 21. We open with this framing mechanism that you mentioned in your recap of like Peter and MJ kind of having like a normal day, if you will, and kind of mirroring each other. I have to say, I was really happy to see that we weren't just going to be starting in a flashback, like as if we were just going to get the issues that some would argue probably should have started this run.
Right.
But that we are getting a framing mechanism both in the present and the past, to me suggests that there's a reason narratively why they wanted to tell this story this way. And
Right.
I enjoyed having the knowledge in the future and watching how it played out in the past. It adds stakes to this whole thing, and I think makes it not just like something like One Moment in Time, where you're just looking at something they decided not to tell you. But in this way, the framing, I think, actually adds a lot to the kind of potency of the flashbacks. What do you think?
Yeah, no, I definitely agree with that. I mean, this is, with that said, I mean, this is unquestionably flashback storytelling, and like there's something to be said about, could they have started seeding some of this earlier in this run, and we could talk about that maybe at the end of this arc to see how it was fully executed. But you're right in terms of like it's not just like, okay guys, we've been baiting you for 20 issues and now we're gonna tell this story 1 year earlier, which is kind of what I thought we were gonna get. It is interesting to see like when Rabin comes back, all of the players that have been crucial to this run so far, it's like they know who this is. You know what I mean? Like I guess the only one we haven't seen a reaction from so far is Norman Osborn, and I imagine that's coming next. But like, like Paul has that line of, I remember how this works. I'll find you when they're safe. Which was a very curious piece of dialogue that we could talk about. But yeah, it's interesting kind of like dual timeline storytelling here, which kind of in its own way makes sense where, considering where I think this is going in terms of timelines and other universes opening up and things like that, based on, again, going back to the 555 to 557 run. So anyway, What did you think of that scene with Paul, though?
I mean, it's definitely really weird. Like there's something up with Paul and the kids, I mean, beyond, I mean, you could read it just as like, he's like, hey, I'll come and help you out once the kids are safe, because they're our top priorities. But like, I think the implication is that like, this guy Rabin and the kids are in some way connected. That was my read. Was that your read?
Oh, 100%. Yeah. This is like I would think about it the way we think about, not to touch this third rail, think about the redheaded child in One More Day. You know what I mean? Like this is I think these are things that are now because of whatever Peter did and whatever Rabin has the power to do. I'll put it to you like that. That's kind of my read of the situation right now.
And it's worth noting that like Rabin is significantly powered up in this scene. Like he like summons like a tornado down onto New York City, and I thought like artistically beautifully rendered between JR and Marcio Menyz, the like that, we see the snow starting to fall on MJ and Paul and the kids, and Peter, is kind of like parallel aligned, panel wise with MJ, but he's got sun casting down on him. I mean, I just thought it sold the drama of that scene so wonderfully as it builds up to MJ shouting that he's back. Like, I mean, talk about a really like loaded opening. Now, to add on to go ahead.
Yeah, I would say, let me just push in on that, because what I was going to say, I know you commended Bacalo's art in the original run, but like I feel like this is where the gifts of storytelling from John Romita Jr. really come into play, because like, you know, he has that ability, I think, to capture like these otherworldly threats, but because of, again, like there is a rawness to, especially when it comes to fighting and violence with Romita, that he just like, you know, like those the punches and the crashing through buildings, it all felt very real and raw, and I think that's what added even more to the drama of this. It's not just like, oh, Peter's fighting a god, you know what I mean? It's like you know, like I felt the hits. I felt the carnage from my, you know, not that carnage. The carnage of what was happening in this comic, and that's all due to Romita. I mean, like, yes, like it could be argued that Rabin is more powered here than he was the first time around, but I think a lot of that has to do with just how well Romita captured him and then captured the action that came from him.
Well, I think, you know, just talking about this open scene, and we'll definitely go talk about the flashback stuff in a moment. But, you know, I think the other thing that really sells this, and I think it's like one of the major downsides to this, the way this run is laid out. And so I'm both commending and knocking it, is, you know, within the Romita issues, we've only really seen Spider-Man go up against like what I would consider like fairly street level thugs, whether it be Tombstone or a power elevated angry Vulture, you know, and the Hobgoblin, you know. But then to see Romita now like elevate it to the threat of like a god, ostensibly, you know, it has an extra punch, because like they did such a great job of like grounding Spider-Man's power set in the opening Romita stuff. On the downside of this issue is we got something like Dark Web, which was so huge, and again, like powers of God stuff. Like I could only, you know, I think in my mind I've largely ignored the existence of Dark Web. But
yeah,
like,
I'm kind of glossing over it in my brain as I read this. I got to be honest.
Yeah, but like, you know, if the whole run had been fairly grounded up to this point, I do think this would have had more punch to it in regards to not only the scale of this bad guy, because only a couple issues ago we saw all of New York taken over by like limbo demons and King Chasm, but also that like we're skipping ahead to the end of this issue where they're in another dimension, like of the dead. It's like, well, didn't we just get that in Limbo? So, you know, it Dark Web I think really does steal a lot of, not steal the thunder, but it's like, you know, it's only more reason to say that Dark Web was a real aberration, I think, in the middle of this run that was just poorly timed, you know, according to all of this. I don't know if you need reactions to that.
Like I said, I mean, like I almost just don't count Dark Web right now. I mean, like I know that's not fair. You know, it all counts, as I said earlier in this episode, but like, I don't know, like there's a part of me that kind of just feels like when it comes to the stuff that is most pertinent in this run, it's the Wells and Romita stuff, and like I'm kind of judging on, you know, like how this gauges with all of that, and you know, like that might be a cop-out in terms of analysis, but like that's how I choose to judge it for my own enjoyment, so that's where I'm gonna stay with.
They're just so much more elevated over the other stuff, and you know, that's not to say I haven't liked some of it. Like issue 10 I thought was a really wonderful tie-in, you know, to Judgment Day, but
right.
The Romita stuff is just on a whole other level.
Yeah.
I did want to make one final note about this opening, and we were talking about the kind of curiosity around the kids. I think it is worth noting that Romy, or Stephanie, or whatever we're calling her, you know, which is definitely an editorial snafu, whether it's her nickname or not, like it is weird to not clear that up in a way. But it's not enough that I'm gonna like weep about it. This is the same comic that called Peter Parker Peter Palmer right out of the gate. But anyway, you know, I don't know that this is anything, but it seems curious to me that, Rabin identifies Peter as the sun-blooded clown priest. And then we've got this young character asking over and over again that she's deep in thought about, do clowns have ears? And, I think it was the word clown that kind of like signaled that to me. And then I think about the colors of Peter, they're kind of clown-like in costume as Spider-Man, and he doesn't have ears when his mask is on. I don't know if that's what it's referring to, but it seems more than coincidental to me. And I kind of want to keep my eyes on, why is she asking about this all of a sudden? And is it related to Spider-Man in some way? So who knows?
I fully expect a very long thread on Twitter from you with images over the years of Spider-Man's ears. So go for it, Dan.
This has the potential to be just as significant as the Lookouts.
Yeah. So anyway, but we will put a pin in that, if you will.
Sure. Well, Mark, I have a sense that you're dying to get to talk about the Slack, and this time I'm not actually joking about it.
Yeah, I mean, Dan, it's funny. You've always been encouraging me to get involved in the Slack, and let me tell you, hundreds of listeners like you hang out in our community of Spider-Man fans on Slack. The Amazing Spider Slack community is absolutely free to join, and you can jump into active conversations with awesome people about collecting, conventions, movies, new comics, old comics, and more. I have been appearing a lot more in the Slack, Dan, and what has that meant for you and your well-being, Dan?
Well, Mark, I was going to pretend like I don't know what actually happened in the Slack this week, because at the time I wrote the script out, I didn't know what you were about to pull out. But then, lo and behold, last night, I think even after I had gone to sleep, Mark unveiled his master plan in the Slack. And, do I regret inviting you to the Slack? You'll never get me to tell. But Mark teased in the Slack, hey, I just made a purchase that might make Dan very upset. And then did not follow up on that for a number of days. And that sent me reeling because what could this possibly mean? What is Mark going to pull out? What comic is he going to reveal? What Spider-Man Ends of the Earth is he going to suggest I need to own so that my collection is complete? And Mark, I don't think I was very far off in what your intent was, but I'm man enough to concede that you have won one over on me. And Mark, tell the listeners at home what you pulled out.
Well, let me set the stage first, Dan.
All right, I'm gonna be over here taking a drink. And
okay. Well, no. So, admittedly, about a week or two ago, I started to my comic book collection. More specifically with new comics, but even some stuff that I've been picking up at cons over the last year and stuff like that. It is a disorganized mess. I mean, outside of the main ASM collection. I have not been doing a good job in archiving and bundling up these issues and stuff like that. So I'm kind of in a spring cleaning mode, if you will. And one of the apps that I use to help with that is the CLZ app, which is something that you actually introduced to me a couple of years ago. I mean, this is it's an app. I keep it on my phone. I can either scan in the barcode or manually input an issue of a comic book I own and where I keep it and what box it's in and all that kind of stuff. And even, if you get an extension, it tells you the value of the comic, which you have to pay extra for. But as a long-term collector, I like to know what my comics are worth. So, I was going through the app, and at one point I was going back to check over ASM just to see what the values were and stuff like that. And I think when I first opened the app, this kind of gnawed at me a little bit, but I noticed that there was technically an issue of Amazing Spider-Man, the main series, not an annual, not a giant size, not an Ends of the Earth one-shot, but in the stream of issues, according to CLZ, of 1 to 441 that I did not have. And that comic in question was Amazing Spider-Man -1, which was part of a run of flashback issues that Marvel did in, I think it was 1995. So every Spider-Man series had a -1 issue. So this was preceding, it's proto learning to crawl, in terms of the timeline. And, I went back and I looked at that and I was like, oh man, it still says I don't have an issue of Amazing Spider-Man. And, I just said, whatever, I'm going to go online, I'm going to find this issue and I'm going to buy it. And I think at some point in the midst of this, I might have asked you, do you own this one? And you're like, no. And I'm like, okay, well, I'm not going to say anything. Because I really just want to twist the knife in here.
Oh, it was like coming right at me.
I know. I mean, you look out. And it arrived in the mail last night, and yeah, I shared it with the Slack that there is an issue of Amazing Spider-Man that I had purchased to complete my collection, and it's an issue that Dan does not own. So yes, as I alluded to in our intro, Dan, when you say I own every issue of Amazing Spider-Man, according to CLZ, you do not own every issue of Amazing Spider-Man, but now I do. But at least you have all the annuals, and you have that one free comic book day issue that I don't have, so you can hold that over me for the time being. So,
and I have all of the Amazing Scarlet Spider issues.
Oh, I have those too.
Oh,
I've had those for a while.
I thought. Look, here I am. Here I am. My good friend Mark, my very good friend Mark. He's harboring these secrets from me. He's not sharing in the love. An opportunity for us to both purchase this at the same time, so that we can finally end our bickering. I'm sending beautiful hardcover books of Spider-Man to Mark's house, just out on a friendly whim, because I care about my good friend Mark. And then my good friend Mark decides I'm going to nuke his apartment from orbit. And look, I'm man enough to say when I've been beaten. And look, I've known about the existence of this issue. I've not encountered it in the wild, so I never bought it. And, and if I had thought it was that big of a priority, I might have jumped on it online myself. But, it's a -1 issue. Like, I didn't know we were counting negatives. Like, do we count the imaginary issues of Spider-Man? Like, because those are infinite, Mark. Yes. Like imaginary numbers, like I haven't even gotten into that territory yet. I will tell you that I did a Google last night. Is there an Amazing Spider-Man number 0? Just to see if I can catch you in some other slip up. And there's not. Although some people count the free comic book day before the Spencer run as 0 for some reason or other.
Oh, that's weird. Yeah.
I know, weird. But I have that. But I'm man enough to say, Mark, you in the Slack, enjoy this period of happiness. And you know what's being purchased later today? Amazing Spider-Man -1. I will have that in my hands by our next episode. I will not let you gloat for more than a week. But this week you've got it. And let it be said, I am a gracious loser.
I appreciate that. And let's just say, there might have been a part of me when I was buying this and not telling you, where my brain was thinking back to the episode where I finally got every annual, and you said, "What about the Planet of the Symbiote Super Special?" And I was just like, "You suck, Boston."
Okay, well, turnabout is fair play. Turnabout is fair play. Well, anyway, congratulations, Mark, on finally completing your collection.
Thank you. It was a long, hard journey. Like a lot of dedication went into this. Finding this issue was a lot of work. But I'm glad to be here. And, when you catch up, Dan, I will also celebrate you and the gifts that you bring to your collection.
Well, so I'm expecting a celebration later this week. Let's just say that. And here's the real question, Mark. Have you read said issue yet?
No.
Will you read it?
I'll look at it tonight, sure.
There we go. Well, anyway, if you want to join in on conversations like that, God help us all, come join our Slack. There's a link in the description to this episode that'll get you in there, and it's a fun place to be, even if it is just dunking on me 9 out of 10 times. And the Slack, I'll say, is very much in favor of Mark on this one. So, I think it's been a long time coming. So, you know what? Like, we each have our victories. Like, I'll take Tom Brevoort calling out your collection as being incomplete, but you can have the -1. I'm more than happy to concede on that level.
You're a good person, and you have a lot of integrity, Dan. So I appreciate that.
I'm going to hold on to that for a while too.
Okay.
Well, let's get back to talking about Amazing Spider-Man number 21. So, like, we go to the flashback, which is decidedly 1 year earlier, not a year and a half earlier. I don't know how you slip up on that, given you gave it a 2-page spread to announce that it was a year earlier. But here we are, and we go right back to the events of Amazing Spider-Man 93, and the kind of reintroduction of Rabin. Tell me what you thought of this whole sequence as it played out.
Yeah, I mean, like, again, I thought that, and we alluded to this in the beginning, but like, I feel like the stakes and the actual threat level of Rabin were really well depicted here, were really well laid out. Like, there was a palatable fear from his first appearance, and then as we went into the flashback zone, like, I think the. And I probably would have thought this at the time. I probably thought this at the time as well, but like even more so now in retrospect. Like it felt like Moreland. You know what I mean? Like I feel like Moreland is the best analogy in terms of like oh man, like what is this guy gonna do? And it's funny kind of when you do go back. It's like Peter does or Spider-Man does kind of. Once the ceremony doesn't happen the way it is, he takes him out pretty easily. But I don't know, something about the way he's depicted here. It's like it feels like the stakes are higher. He's even more ticked off because of what happened, how many years or months ago in chronology that this is supposed to happen. And like I don't know, like I in my attempt to both fill in the gaps of what we're about to find out, for, what did Peter do? It's like you really get a sense like, oh man, this guy can cause some real damage here, and he probably did, and that's why we are where we are right now. Like it all clicks together and makes sense. It's not like nothing doesn't feel unearned. It's not like some weird random threat emerges that doesn't actually feel built up, and it's like, oh, so this is what screws up this timeline. Okay, like this feels like it should be it, like.
Yeah, and any kind of like reader discrepancy there in regards to like, oh my God, this was out of nowhere is echoed by Peter and Mary Jane. Right. It's not acknowledged by the comic. I will say like the reason that Peter is able to dispatch of Rabin in the original comic so quickly is because the ceremony ends, and here it starts with him in his jail cell. And he's powering himself up by killing all the other people in the cell as sacrifices, as he does in the original story. It's not made explicit in the new issue, but that's where his power is derived from, is killing all those other people. And then, like, something very strange, like the sort of teleporting through blood is something that is new for this story, as opposed to the past one. It conveyed interestingly by the art team here of like having the kind of like bubble word balloons kind of appear in the blood and have him kind of on this kind of road of blood, as he said in issue 93. But I agree with you. I think everything about this presentation of this character sells the threat, the SWAT team like racing outside of his cell, all the bodies and blood built up in the jail. I think Menyz's like brilliant yellow colors of the light gives him this like otherworldly cosmic thing, and it's got his cryptic dialogue back from the original story he appeared in. I mean, all of it sells like that this guy is like a real threat. Even just like him like saying magic words, and the side of the building that Peter and Mary Jane live in are potentially moving in together, opening up. It's dramatic stuff, and equally met by the level of power that Peter puts into trying to save Mary Jane there. It's definitely like a standout how much the body slamming and like confidence, well, I mean even confidence, but like just pure like antagonism towards Rabin that made it exciting to read.
Now, I do want to jump on something you just said there, because it was something else I really appreciated about this, which was the fact that, like, and not to bait a certain segment of an online fan base, but like, despite the claims that, Marvel doesn't care about Peter and Mary Jane together, one of the things that I really thought this issue captured was like, I was immediately brought back to the period not so long ago where these two characters were together and very much in love and ready to move in with each other because of the way this whole sequence was framed. Like, you know what I mean? Like, it was, Peter was rightfully ticked off, but also like defensive and protective because of, the fact that MJ was in danger, you know what I mean? And like, I think it kind of made him elevate how he responded because of the fact that he was trying to protect and take care of MJ there. He even cracks the aside of like, it's a nasty thing you just did to that woman's apartment, especially when her boyfriend's about to move in. You know what I mean? Like, so it felt very much in that moment and that emotion. It's not like, not that I necessarily expected them to, but the fact of the matter was, like, I got no impression whatsoever that this was being written and created by a team that does not care about the relationship and the dynamics of these two main characters. Just, like this did not feel like the love of Peter and his sister. You know what I mean? Like,
absolutely. And that's what's always like really baffled me about this whole thing is like there was always something else that happened that like we are going to learn about. Like, even in the opening of this where we're in the future, like MJ is committed. There's that image where Paul is leaving and he says like, you remember how this works? And she says like, I remember. And she looks like terrified of what that means for her. Like, we're going to find out what it is. Like, this is not a like, I hate this marriage and want to undo it. Like, they're telling a story here. I don't know where it's going to go ultimately, but there's something very dramatic happening. And all of this very consistent, I find, with the characters, as we're going to find out. And hopefully it sticks the landing. But even like the way that Zeb has written Peter in this run and during Beyond with his level of confidence. Like, I loved when he had, Rabin pinned down and he webs down his throat and beats him up and tells him, I'm not done talking, as he's beating him. Like, that's the like confident Spider-Man that we have kind of slowly gotten and appearing in this book. As much as people want to complain about him, like asking for help when he's getting potentially killed by the Vulture, like I think we've seen a more mature Spider-Man that can handle himself, and we're seeing it on the page here. So it sold me on the threat, it sold me on the pacing, and it sold me on the characters. Like, I'm on board this story, and this very much felt like a setup, and we're gonna get to the really interesting stuff soon. I thought, like, for an intro, this is one of the strongest intros to a major story that we've gotten in a while, and I'm really excited. I can't wait 2 weeks to find out what happens next.
Yeah. All I'm going to say is an exclamation point. You asked, like, oh, what does this mean for Peter and MJ ultimately at the end of the day? And all I'm going to say is, like, hey, man, Romeo and Juliet's considered one of the greatest love stories ever written. And the fact of the matter is, it's not because those two characters end up happily ever after at the end. So, like, that is just a fact of storytelling sometimes, is that not everything gets wrapped up neatly. So, let's just see where this goes. But yeah, like, there's clearly emotion and feelings and stakes being attached to all of this here and how this is being written. I'm feeling all of that. It all comes out very clearly on the page. I agree with you. This is about as strong as an opening to an arc like this that you could ask for. Let's talk a little bit more about the art team, though, because I feel like they really delivered here as well.
Yeah, I agree. Although with the caveat that JRJR just cannot draw kids. Like, can we acknowledge that just out of the gate? Like, who are these monsters?
I could say the same about my own child, but whatever. I mean, who is this monster?
So, the problem is that JRJR is using Mark's son as a model. Is that the suggestion?
No.
That's going into the record books for posterity. Never with my son. I love him too much. Right.
Oh.
Yeah.
wait till he gets older, Dan. Okay. So,
you may have a -1, but I have the love of my child.
Oh, come on. Talk about the art team.
Yeah, no, I think that what more is there to say about JRJR here? I mean, like, I love the parallelism, and that was probably a team effort, but like the way that he renders on the page, the opening, and then like whether it's him or Marcio Menyz who is doing the kind of blurring of the motion when people are tackling each other, like this run has been full of Peter and enemies slamming people's bodies horizontally across the page, and like, sign me up if that's what all of what we get, moving forward. Like, he's really selling the like momentum of body movement on the page here, and and using the colors to reinforce that. I mean, just the shrapnel and the fallout of all these things and the subtle character work. I appreciate the hell out of it.
Yeah. All right. You want to give this thing a grade?
Yeah. I'm going to give this one a B+.
Oh man, I'm gonna go higher than you, Dan. I'm giving this an A-. I really liked how this kicked off. This is probably my favorite issue of the run so far.
Wow.
And I really, even though it's referring to a story that I'm kind of mixed on, I'm hooked on the concept here, and like you said, I can't wait for 2 weeks, which is not, even in the issues I have really enjoyed over the course of this arc, I have not had this feeling of I gotta find out what's next in a while here, and that's a really great feeling to be at as a reader and a fan here. So A- for me.
Yeah, and I think I'm just kind of still a little like how is this gonna play out? Like wait and see. Like emotionally, I feel a little torn because I'm in two places. I'm like, I know how this plays out, and I don't. And we haven't really talked about the twist ending of Xibalba. I'm like, I got to admit, I'm a little wary of like Spider-Man other dimensional stuff. But like, I am still excited by all of that. I think, like, to me, this was like kind of a solid expositional, like, kind of repeat of past themes. And I'm like ready for the next issues to really show me something really, truly new. And right. That's where I'm going to probably give out my A grades, depending on how that goes. So, yeah.
All I'll add to that, Dan, is, like we have been existing in a status quo that seems utterly absurd on its face. So like it needs some kind of extraordinary explanation to how we got here. And I think from that standpoint, this issue has laid the groundwork to have that extraordinary explanation. I mean, where they go with it next remains to be seen, but I am now like completely hooked into the idea of like where this might be going, because I feel like they're playing within a certain set of rules and they're following those rules. So I'm in, so that's all I wanted to add to that. So.
I mean, to think that we have 5 more issues of this, and 2 of which are double sized, and we're moving this quickly into the setup of this is really promising. And, we have been hoodwinked before, Mark, on these big stories, and we'll be the first to like eat a shoe if it goes south. But I think, and you said something similar to this, I think, online, which is if this is pulled off and sells all of the promise of the setup, I think like you can argue about whether this was the right choice to like, withhold this, and that's going to still play out over the next few issues. But I think this has a real possibility to redeem a lot of the criticisms people have had of the Zeb Wells run up to this point, minus like a few issues here and there and Dark Web, and really make this like a standout run that launching into a second year of this without the mystery box hanging over this could be a really exciting time to be reading Amazing Spider-Man, and I'm here for it.
Yeah. I mean, heck, even Roger Stern had Fool Killer, which I still defend, but I'm just saying, like, not every issue could be gold, but
absolutely.
Yeah. Anyway, why don't we transition to the end times for our episode here, Dan?
Sure. Off to Zeb Wells with us.
Well, it is that time for Zeb Wells, but also time for all good things to come to an end. So we want to say thank you to you, the listeners and viewers, for tuning into this episode of the Amazing Spider Talk.
Yeah, this podcast exists because of listener support on our Patreon. For only $3.99 a month, you can help support our show's existence while getting early episodes, including these reviews, the same week the comics release. You can get exclusive artwork and a ton of other bonuses, especially as Season 6 begins to roll out. So a thank you to everyone who already supports us and the work that Mark and I do. Plus, I wanted to issue a special thanks to our newest Patreon member, Joe Schulz. So thanks, Joe, for signing up and helping support what Mark and I do.
To download our earliest episodes, including interviews with legendary creators like JMD, Tom DeFalco, Ron Friends, Mark Bagley, and many, many more, subscribe to our Amazing Spider Talk Back Issues podcast on Apple Podcasts.
And I will say, David Michelinie's interview with us was recently added to that feed. So if you want to go listen to one of our better interviews and one of the final podcast interviews David ever did, go check out that interview on the Amazing Spider Talk Back Issues podcast.
I believe that was the interviewer I was referred to as a fanboy, Dan. So there you go. If you want to hear a mischievous Mark be a fanboy, go download that episode.
Absolutely. Well, this podcast episode was edited by Rick Coast. The video version of the show is available on YouTube and was edited by Alex Galucki. Our artwork comes handcrafted by artists Ron Friends, Sal Buscema, and Ray Sumser. Our theme songs were produced by Rylan Bojack, Tony Thaxton, and Spider-Madge, and our animated intro was created and performed by Josh Sutton. So, Mark, until Rabin gets himself a good barber, what's our motto?
With great podcasts, there must also come the Amazing Spider Talk.